When your loved one died, you didn't fall apart. Or maybe you did, but only for a moment, because then you got back up and kept going. You kept cooking, you kept cleaning, you kept showing up for everyone else, carrying the weight of everything when something inside you cried without stopping. And maybe no one ever told you that staying on your feet when grief is crushing you is exactly what Saint Martha recognizes in you, because she lived it first. And on July 29th, the day of her feast, she brings that recognition before Christ. She brings your name. She brings the name of your departed, and she does for that soul what only she can do. Martha of Bethany was not the one who stayed home and waited when word came that Christ was near. She was the one who ran out to meet him before anyone else even moved. And when she reached him, she didn't open with rehearsed prayers. She told him the truth. "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." That sentence cost her everything she had. And Christ listened to her first. He answered her first. What he said to her in that moment, those words spoken only to Martha before he ever reached the tomb, changes everything you can hope for on behalf of your departed loved one this July 29th. Leave your loved one's name in the comments. Just their name. What comes next was kept for you, and each part depends on the one before it. In the convent of St. Joseph in Avila, the first one Saint Teresa of Jesus founded in 1562, there was a weekly tradition that Saint Teresa herself established and that her nuns kept without fail. Each week, one of the sisters was assigned to the household tasks: cooking, cleaning, caring for the sick. That rotation was called the Office of Martha. Saint Teresa gave it that name deliberately because for her, Martha of Bethany was more than a figure in the gospel. She was a way of being in the world, a way of loving God with your hands full. That matters more than it might seem. In the 16th century, Christian spirituality tended to treat the active life and the contemplative life as two roads that almost never crossed. The contemplatives prayed, the active ones served, and many considered the distance between those two worlds impossible to bridge. Saint Teresa thought differently. In The Way of Perfection, she wrote that the souls of her nuns should resemble both Martha and Mary at the same time, because one without the other was incomplete. The soul that only contemplates without serving can fall into the illusion of a prayer emptied of love, and the soul that only serves without contemplating can lose sight of the one who gives that service its meaning. For Saint Teresa, Martha was the model of something very specific. Love that doesn't stop even when the body is exhausted, love that seeks Christ even in the middle of pots and pans, the kind of love that Saint Teresa described in a phrase her sisters knew by heart, and that's still hard to forget. God walks among the pots and pans. She wrote it, she lived it first. To understand what Saint Martha can do for the soul of your departed loved one on July 29th, you have to understand who Martha was in her own story. The Martha of the Gospel of John. The woman who lived something no other woman in the New Testament lived in quite the same way. Martha was the eldest of 3 siblings. They lived in Bethany, a village less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, close enough that pilgrims heading into the city passed through, far enough away to have some quiet. The 3 of them, Martha, Mary, and Lazarus, appear in the Gospels as people Jesus visited often. Luke mentions them briefly. John knows them well. And in John's Gospel, there's a line that defines the whole relationship. Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, 3 names, 3 people. The love stated before any miracle happens, before any healing, before Jesus does anything for them at all. Just offered as background, as the context in which everything else is going to take place. And that changes how you read everything that follows. Martha was the one who welcomed Jesus into her home. Luke tells us that on one of those visits, Martha was busy with all the preparations, while her sister Mary sat at the Master's feet and listened, and Martha who had been watching, walked up to Jesus and said something no one with good manners would have said. "Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her to help me." A complaint? Straight out, no softening, with the exhaustion of someone who's been in the kitchen for hours and can't take any more. And Jesus answered her with tenderness, not with a reprimand. "Martha, Martha, you are worried and upset about many things. Only one thing is needed." Many people read that scene as a correction, as if Jesus were telling Martha she was wrong. But Saint Teresa of Jesus read it differently. In The Way of Perfection, while discussing the different modes of prayer, she points out that Martha wasn't doing anything wrong when she served. She was doing exactly what was hers to do, and that Jesus called her by name twice, "Martha, Martha," with the repetition that in the gospel always signals affection, not distance. Jesus wasn't pushing her away. He was seeing her. He was naming her. And there is an enormous difference between the two. Saint Teresa understood that Martha stood for all the people who love God with their bodies in motion, the ones who care for the sick, the ones who cook for everyone else, the ones who hold up the visible world while others hold up the invisible one. And she knew that this kind of love, when it's rooted in God, carries a power that isn't obvious on the surface, but acts, because Martha served Christ, and Christ, who received that service, did not forget it. There's something more. In church tradition, Martha is patron of homemakers, cooks, and those who work in the household. But there's a lesser-known dimension of her patronage that connects directly to the departed. In some regions of the ancient church, Martha was invoked in the rites for the dead, because she was the woman who was present at the greatest resurrection recorded before Easter. She didn't just lose her brother, she got him back. And that experience puts her in a position unlike any other saint in heaven when someone comes before her with the name of a departed soul on their lips. She knows that pain. She lived it for 4 days. And when she went out on the road to meet Christ, she wasn't carrying a prepared prayer or carefully chosen words. She went with the truth of a woman who had buried her brother and was still standing because standing was all she knew how to do. That's Martha. And on July 29th, that's exactly what she brings before Christ for the souls you entrust to her. The 4 days that Lazarus had been in the tomb when Jesus arrived in Bethany are not a minor detail. In the Jewish tradition of the 1st century, it was believed that the soul remained near the body for 3 days after death, and that by the 4th day, the separation was final. The body had begun to visibly decay, and with that decay, something was sealed that couldn't be undone. 4 days, in the minds of those surrounding Martha and Mary, meant there was nothing left to do. It meant death had won, by all the rules. Martha knew that. And she knew it with a clarity that pressed down on her chest every time she let herself face it directly. When word reached her that Jesus was nearby, Martha went out. She didn't wait. She went out while her sister Mary stayed in the house, surrounded by those who had come to mourn with them. That's what the Gospel of John says. As soon as Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him. Just that. Martha went. And that detail, as plain as it looks, is the one Saint Teresa of Jesus returned to when she talked about the prayer of someone who loves and has lost something. The person who truly expects something from God doesn't sit still and wait for God to come to where she is. She goes out to meet him. She goes even though the road is full of people watching and wondering where she's headed. She goes even though her legs feel heavy. She goes because staying still is the one thing she cannot do. Martha reached Jesus and said, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Stay with that sentence for a moment. It's not a cold accusation, and it's not a resigned complaint either. It's something stranger and more honest than either of those things. It's the sentence of someone who believes so deeply in the person standing in front of her that she dares to say what would have happened if things had gone differently. If you had been here, Martha isn't doubting the power of Christ. She's telling him that she needs that power right now, that he has come too late, that the pain of these 4 days has a name, and that name is absence. Your absence. The absence of someone who could have changed everything and wasn't there. And Jesus didn't defend himself. He didn't explain why he had taken so long. He didn't tell her he had reasons she couldn't yet understand. He answered directly into Martha's wound with something that went far beyond what she had come to ask. Your brother will rise again. Martha heard that and responded with the answer of someone who knows the doctrine, but at that moment needs more than doctrine. I know he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. I know. I believe it. But that's a long way off. That's the end of time. That's not now. That doesn't give me my brother back today. And that was when Jesus said something he had never said to anyone before. I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. He said those words to Martha on a dusty road between Jerusalem and Bethany, with the sun overhead and the smell of grief still on both of them. He said them to her, the one who had run out, who had spoken up, who hadn't stayed home crying in silence. Christ chose Martha to receive one of the greatest revelations in all of Scripture. And after he said it, he asked her a question. Do you believe this? Martha answered with the most complete profession of faith found anywhere in the Gospel of John before the Passion. She didn't just say yes. She said, Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who is to come into the world. That confession, made before any miracle, before Lazarus came out of the tomb, before she had any proof of what was about to happen, is the heart of Martha's power as an intercessor. She believed first. And in believing first, before seeing, there is something Saint Teresa of Jesus identified as the most demanding and most powerful condition of prayer. Faith that asks without seeing, that trusts without yet holding in its hands what it's asking for. What happened next at the tomb of Lazarus is what everyone knows. Christ arrived, was deeply moved, wept, ordered the stone removed, and called Lazarus by name. And Lazarus came out, still wrapped in burial cloths, feet and hands still bound, alive. Martha had believed before she saw any of that. And that sequence, believe before you see, is what defines what Saint Martha does when she intercedes for a departed soul. She goes before Christ with the name of that soul, trusting that Christ can do something for it before she knows what he will do. What? And that faith, the faith of a woman who already watched a dead man walk out of his tomb because she trusted before it happened, carries a weight before God that very few things in heaven carry in quite the same way. Now there's a question that has hung in the air since the moment Jesus spoke to Martha on that dusty road. A question about something that changed inside Martha in that exchange. Something that goes far beyond getting her brother back. Something Christ placed in her in that conversation that no one else in that whole crowd received that day. And that's what explains why her intercession on July 29th has a quality unlike any other. A quality that Saint Teresa of Avila recognized and explained with a clarity worth hearing slowly. Saint Teresa of Avila came back to the Gospel of John again and again in her writings. She did it with the familiarity of someone who has read the same passage hundreds of times and keeps finding something she hadn't noticed before. The episode in Bethany, the raising of Lazarus, was one that stopped her more than once. There are references to it in both The Way of Perfection and The Interior Castle. But what Saint Teresa of Jesus highlighted about that episode was not the miracle. It was the conversation that came before it. The conversation between Christ and Martha on the road, before he ever reached the tomb. In The Way of Perfection, while discussing the different paths that lead the soul to God, Saint Teresa distinguishes two modes of relationship with Christ that she finds represented in the two sisters of Bethany. Mary is the contemplative soul, the one who sits, listens, and lets the presence of Christ fill everything. Martha is the active soul, the one who serves, works, cares for others, and seeks God in the constant movement of someone who always has something to do. And Saint Teresa makes it very clear that neither path is superior to the other. They are different. They serve God in different ways, and the Church needs both. But there's something Saint Teresa adds about Martha that doesn't always get remembered, something that changes how you understand why her intercession carries the weight it does. Saint Teresa points out that Martha, in the Bethany episode, didn't just serve Christ. Martha talked with Christ. And not only talked, she pushed back. She questioned. She declared her faith. And Christ answered her with a revelation that he didn't give to his disciples in that moment, didn't give to the crowd, didn't give even to Mary, who was inside the house weeping. He gave it to Martha, to the one who had gone out on the road with grief in her throat and faith still on her lips. That says something about the active life of prayer that Saint Teresa wanted her nuns to understand. That a life of service, when it's rooted in God, is not a second-tier path that reaches Christ more slowly. It can be, at certain moments, the most direct route, because the person who serves with love develops a kind of boldness before God that the quietly contemplative person doesn't always reach in the same way. Martha's boldness, the boldness of a woman who walked out on the road and told Christ the truth about her pain, was answered with a revelation that changed the history of faith. And then there's the question Christ asked after pronouncing that revelation. Do you believe this? A direct, personal question. No room for a vague answer. It demanded a yes or a no, and Martha said yes, with every word, with the complete faith of someone who hadn't yet seen but had already let go of doubt. Saint Teresa of Jesus understood that scene as a model of what happens in the deepest prayer, the prayer that doesn't need to see in order to believe. In the interior castle, discussing the innermost dwelling places, the ones closest to the center where God dwells, Saint Teresa describes a state of soul in which faith becomes so firm it no longer needs external evidence to hold itself up. The soul knows, not because it has witnessed something extraordinary, but because it has reached a point of such complete trust in the goodness of God that doubt simply has no room. That's what Martha lived on the road in Bethany before Lazarus came out of the tomb, a certainty that had no facts behind it yet, only the person standing in front of her. And here is where something comes into view that hasn't been said yet. Something that has to do with July 29th specifically, and with the power Martha holds on that day above all other days of the year. The saints intercede always. The communion of saints is a constant doctrine, not a seasonal one. But the Church has known since its earliest centuries that the liturgical feasts of the saints are moments of heightened intensity, of their presence and their intercession. Not because the saints are absent the rest of the year, but because the feast is the moment when the whole Church, the living and the dead, those still making their way on earth and those at rest in heaven, converges on a single point in sacred time. And that convergence has a weight that acts. July 29th is the feast of Saint Martha. And on that day, in Church tradition, her intercession is especially available to those who call on her, particularly for those who come before her with the name of a departed soul, because that is her territory, the territory of the one who lost and recovered, the territory of the one who told Christ about the death of someone she loved and watched Christ respond. But the question that still hasn't been answered is this: what does Martha actually do when she intercedes? How does she act? What does she bring before God when she carries the name of your departed? The ancient Church had a specific practice for the eve of the feast of Saint Martha that very few people today know about. A practice that Saint Teresa of Avila noted among the devotional customs she admired in the older communities she visited during her foundations. A practice that connects directly to the departed, and that you can observe on July 28th, the night before the 29th arrives. That's what comes next. Devotion to Saint Martha in the ancient church has roots deeper and older than most Catholics today realize. In the earliest Christian communities of Syria and Palestine, Martha was venerated as an eyewitness to the raising of Lazarus, and that made her a figure of special standing among the saints of the first generation. She hadn't merely known Christ, she had held a conversation with him about death and resurrection that no other gospel attributes to any other person with that level of detail and depth. And the communities that preserved that memory invoked her with one very specific intention: for their dead. There is documentation of devotional practices in 4th century Syro-Palestinian communities that included the invocation of Martha in the rites for the departed. When a family lost a loved one, they came to prayer in Martha's name as intercessor, precisely because she had been there in Bethany that day, because she knew what it was to lose someone and to receive from Christ something no human being had ever received before. That invocation carried a very concrete theology behind it. If Christ had revealed to Martha that he is the resurrection and the life, then Martha had a relationship with the destiny of the dead that other saints couldn't claim in the same way. In France, devotion to Saint Martha has a particularly rich history. The Provençal tradition, which the Church recognizes while placing it in the realm of pious legend, holds that Martha came to Provence after the ascension of Christ and spent the rest of her life there, preaching and praying. In Tarascon, on the banks of the Rhone, there has been a basilica dedicated to her since the 9th century, and for centuries it was one of the most visited pilgrimage sites for families who carried their dead in their hearts. The votive inscriptions preserved in that basilica are testimonies from people who came before Martha with the name of a departed loved one and left evidence of having received an answer. Saint Teresa of Avila knew these traditions. During her years of foundations, which took her through Castile, Andalusia, and other parts of 16th century Spain, she came into contact with communities of deep devotional memory, communities that had preserved practices of invoking the saints for the departed going back centuries. And Saint Teresa didn't dismiss them. She observed them. She valued them. And in her writings, she left signs that she understood why the ancient devotion to the saints carried a wisdom that more recent spirituality didn't always manage to match. In The Way of Perfection, discussing how to petition the saints, Saint Teresa notes that the Church doesn't pray to the saints because the saints own the graces, but because they are intercessors who bring our petitions before God with a familiarity and a confidence that we ourselves don't always reach. And what distinguishes one saint from another, in terms of their effectiveness for a specific need, is their personal experience of that need. The saints who have lived what you're living intercede with an inside understanding that others don't carry in the same way. Martha lived the loss of someone she loved, completely and without relief. 4 full days with her brother dead. 4 days of not knowing, of waiting for Christ who wasn't coming, of receiving condolences from people who couldn't do anything, of staying on her feet because there was no other option, and then the conversation on the road, and faith before the miracle, and Lazarus walking out of the tomb. Martha holds that complete experience, the pain of loss and the certainty of Christ's response. That makes her an intercessor not only powerful, but understanding. She knows what you feel when you bring the name of your departed before her. She knows it from the inside. The practice that Saint Teresa of Jesus valued in the ancient communities she visited was something very simple. The vigil of Saint Martha's feast, July 28th at night, was dedicated to specific prayer for the family's departed. A candle was lit, each departed person was named aloud, and Saint Martha was asked to carry those names before Christ, the same way she had carried the weight of Lazarus. A prayer, without complicated formulas or long chains of recitation. the prayer of someone who trusts a person who has already been in that place and knows the road back. That practice makes sense within the logic of everything we've been building. The vigil as preparation, the night as threshold, the name spoken aloud as an act of faith that sets something in motion, something that, the next day, at the feast itself, reaches its fullest intensity, and there's something more. Something the history of devotion to Saint Martha reveals about the kind of presence she holds before God when she intercedes. And that explains why her intercession on July 29th can reach the soul of your departed loved one in a way that few other things can. It has to do with what Christ promised her on the road in Bethany, not the miracle of Lazarus, but something beyond the miracle. A promise Christ made in that moment, one that became bound to Martha's name forever. A promise that defines exactly what the soul of your departed can expect when Martha presents it before Christ on the day of her feast. And one that Saint Teresa of Avila read with particular attention, because in that promise, she found the key to why Martha's intercession for the dead reaches further than the believer can calculate from earth. I am the resurrection and the life. Those 7 words were spoken by Christ only once in the Gospels. He said them on the road in Bethany before reaching the tomb of Lazarus, in a private conversation with a woman who had just told him that her brother would not have died if he had been there. And he didn't say them in the temple, not to the crowds who followed him, not to his apostles gathered in the upper room. He said them to Martha, to her first, to the woman who was standing in front of him carrying 4 days of grief on her shoulders and faith still burning somewhere inside. The theologian Origen, in his 3rd century commentaries on the Gospel of John, observed that Christ chose to pronounce that revelation in the most painful context possible. Before a woman in mourning on an unnamed road, without significant witnesses, without ceremony of any kind, and that choice was not accidental. That Christ reveals the highest truths in the lowest moments to people who are on the ground, because from the ground, you can see more clearly how far it is to heaven. Saint Teresa of Avila paused on that detail more than once. In the interior castle, discussing the graces God distributes unevenly among souls, Saint Teresa observes that Christ doesn't choose his most important interlocutors in the moments when the world is watching. He chooses them in small moments, on roads without an audience, in conversations no one expected to happen. And the fact that he chose Martha to receive that revelation says something about the kind of soul that receives the highest graces. The soul that seeks Christ in the middle of pain, that goes out to meet him without waiting for him to arrive first. That tells him the truth about what she feels, even when that truth is a complaint, a protest, a question with no answer yet. Martha received from Christ something no other disciple received in quite that direct and personal way in that moment, the full identity of Christ in relation to death. I am the resurrection and the life. Those words changed her, because after hearing them, Martha was no longer simply the woman who had a dead brother and got him back. She became the keeper of a revelation with direct consequences for everyone who will die, for everyone who has already died, for everything death means within the Christian faith. And she carries that revelation with her now, in heaven before God, when someone entrusts a departed soul to her. What happens when Saint Martha intercedes for a departed soul on July 29th is not simply that she makes a request and waits to see what happens. What happens is that she stands before Christ with the revelation he himself gave her, and she uses it as her case. Not in the human sense of argument, which implies doubt and the possibility of being refuted, but in the theological sense that the great teachers of prayer have called presenting God with his own words. The most effective prayer is the one that takes what God has said and returns it as petition. Christ said he is the resurrection and the life. Martha knows that better than anyone. And when she intercedes for a departed soul, what she's doing is reminding Christ, with all the confidence of someone who heard him say it, that what he promised still applies. Saint Teresa of Avila describes that dynamic in The Way of Perfection while discussing petitionary prayer. She says that souls more advanced in the spiritual life don't ask timidly, but with a boldness that comes from knowing who they're asking. That this boldness isn't a lack of humility, but an excess of trust, and that God is pleased by that excess because it comes from someone who has truly believed his word. Martha is the exact model of that boldness. She was bold with Christ on the road in Bethany when she told him that if he had been there, Lazarus would not have died. And Christ listened. He responded, and he raised Lazarus. That Martha, the bold one, the one who pushed back and believed and witnessed the miracle, is the one now standing before God with the name of your departed, with the same boldness, with the same faith that came before the miracle, with the same capacity to present Christ with his own words and expect an answer, because she already knows that Christ answers. The promise Christ made on the road in Bethany carried no expiration date. I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. That promise covers the soul of your departed loved one. Martha knows it. And on July 29th, with the whole church gathered in her feast, she carries that name before Christ with the certainty of someone who already watched a tomb open because she trusted before it happened. What remains is how you participate in all of this, what you can do on July 29th to open your part of that current. What concrete acts, rooted in the teaching that Saint Teresa of Avila understood so well, set in motion something the soul of your departed loved one can receive from where it is. Because the intercession of Saint Martha on July 29th doesn't happen in a vacuum or in silence. It happens in response to what you do that day from earth. And what you do or don't do has real consequences for the soul you carry in your heart. That's what closes everything we've been opening from the beginning. July 29th has its own spiritual logic. The Feast of Saint Martha invites you to focus on one thing, to do that day with your whole soul what on other days gets done in passing or put off until later. And when it comes to the departed loved one you carry in your heart, that one thing has 3 moments that hold each other up. Together, they form something that goes beyond individual devotion. The first happens in the morning, before the day fills up with activity. Before the phone starts ringing and routine absorbs everything. Name your departed. Say their name out loud, calmly, without rushing. Just the name. And then speak aloud a direct petition. Saint Martha, you who were in Bethany when Lazarus came out of the tomb, bring the name of my departed before Christ today. That's all. No elaborate formulas, no long-chain prayers that sometimes get recited without feeling a thing. Just the name of your departed and the direct petition to Martha, with the same simplicity Martha used when she spoke to Christ on the road. Saint Teresa of Avila taught her nuns that the most powerful prayer is often the shortest, the prayer that comes from a soul that knows exactly what it's asking for and who it's asking. In The Way of Perfection, she wrote that a single act of love given with full attention is worth more than 100 prayers recited with the mind somewhere else. That applies directly to what you can do for your departed loved one on July 29th. The second moment is Mass. If you can attend Mass that day, go. And when the priest elevates the host, in that precise instant that Saint Teresa of Jesus described as the moment where heaven and earth touch, bring the name of your departed to the altar, silently, with faith. Offer the Mass for that soul. The Church teaches that the Mass is the most powerful suffrages that exists for the departed, because in the Mass, Christ offers himself as he did on the cross, and that offering covers everything God's mercy needs to act on his soul in purgatory. Saint Martha is in heaven. Mass is also celebrated in heaven in the eternal liturgy. When you offer the Mass of July 29th for your departed, Martha isn't absent from that act. She's inside it. And the petition you made in the morning the name you spoke when you woke up, arrives at that Mass as part of a current that has been moving for hours. The morning prayer and the Mass of the day are the same river, just at different points in the same channel. The third moment is service. Saint Martha is the saint of active service. And Saint Teresa of Avila understood that service done with spiritual intention carries a redemptive value that goes beyond its practical usefulness. That day, do something for someone else, something concrete. Sit with a person who is alone. Prepare a meal for someone who needs it. Help clean for an elderly neighbor. Call someone who hasn't heard from anyone in a long time. And as you do it, offer that act for the soul of your departed. Say inwardly while you're doing it, I offer this for the soul of my loved one. May Saint Martha carry it before Christ. That act of service, made with that intention, is exactly the kind of suffrages that the Teresian tradition recognizes as effective, because Martha served. And to serve in her name on the day of her feast, with the soul of your departed as your intention, carries a spiritual coherence that God doesn't leave unanswered. Saint Teresa of Avila wrote in the book of her Foundations that acts of charity performed with a suffrage's intention for a departed soul reach that soul, mediated by the goodness of God, who doesn't overlook the love that moves them. Service that day is prayer with your hands. And Martha recognizes it because she herself never stopped serving. Here is where everything that was opened from the beginning closes. This is how Saint Martha intercedes for the soul of your departed on July 29th. She stands before Christ as she stood on the road in Bethany, with the name of that soul on her lips. She presents to Christ his own words. You said that you are the resurrection and the life. This soul believed in you, and she waits for the answer with the same faith with which she waited then. Before Lazarus came out, before the stone moved, before anything was visible yet. And what you have done that day, naming the departed, offering the Mass, serving in their name, is your part. The part you put in from earth into that current that Martha holds from heaven. Both parts together form what Saint Teresa of Avila called in her writings the complete work of charity for the departed, what the living does and what the saint carries. When the two join, the soul that is waiting receives something. Church teaching affirms it. The experience of the saints confirms it. And the Gospel of John holds the proof that Martha knows exactly what she's doing when she stands before Christ with the name of someone dead on her lips. Lazarus came out, burial cloths and all, alive, with 4 days of death behind him and the voice of Christ still in the air. And Christ, who did that because of Martha's faith in Bethany, is still today who he was then, the same resurrection, the same life, the same one who listens when someone goes out to meet him on the road, carrying the name of a dead person and faith still intact. You made it this far. And what you've received along this road isn't the same as what you receive when someone simply tells you a story. You came here carrying the name of your departed somewhere in your chest. That mixture of love and question that belongs to anyone who has lost someone and keeps looking for ways not to lose them entirely. And what you found here was something you may not have expected. A woman from the Gospel who lived exactly what you're living, who had someone dead for 4 days, who stayed on her feet when grief was crushing her, who went running out to find Christ because staying still was the one thing she could not do, and who told him the truth without softening it. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Martha spoke from the lowest place, and Christ heard her from above. What Saint Teresa of Avila understood about that scene you've heard slowly today. That prayer rising from pain carries a weight that comfortable prayer can't match. That faith that declares before seeing is the one that opens what appears to be permanently shut. That Martha received from Christ the greatest revelation in the Gospel of John before the Passion, and that she carries that revelation with her now in heaven, and that on July 29th she uses it. She brings it before Christ with the name of your departed and waits for the answer with the same certainty she held on the road in Bethany, before Lazarus came out, before anything was visible yet. You've also heard what you can do that day. Name the departed out loud, offer the Mass, serve in their name. 3 simple moments that together form your part of something Martha holds from the other side, what the living does and what the saint carries. The complete work of charity for those who have already gone. Staying to the end was the best decision you could have made today for that soul. And that's no small thing. There's something the saints in heaven do with the souls that seek them. They hold them, they carry them. And Saint Martha has a way of carrying things that the ancient church knew well, with her hands full, without making noise, without announcing what she has just delivered. Like when she served in that house in Bethany, and Christ was at the table, and she came and went without anyone taking notice of the plates she set down. That's how she intercedes, without ceremony, with care, with the quiet love of someone who knows what she's doing because she lived it once before and saw what happened. That love is available for your departed loved one on July 29th. And beyond that day, there's something Saint Teresa of Jesus taught very clearly in the way of perfection that's worth taking with you. That charity for the departed is not a one-time gesture made on marked dates and forgotten the rest of the year. That love for those who have gone is a form of continuous prayer that sustains the soul of the departed in a way nothing else can sustain it in quite the same manner. Every time you think of that person with love, every time you do something and offer it for them, every time you name them before God, even in silence, you're doing something that arrives, that reaches, that touches the soul from wherever it is and accompanies it in what remains of its journey. Saint Martha is the intercessor for that journey, the one who knows what it is to walk it with someone dead in your heart and faith still burning. And July 29th is her day. The day when the Church draws all that power together and makes it available to those who come before her with a name and a petition. You have that name, you have that petition, and now you have the understanding of why July 29 is the day to place it in Martha's hands. That's what you take from here. There are people who have found here something they've been looking for a long time, who came carrying questions about their departed, about death, about what they can do from earth for those who have already gone, and who found answers that the Catholic faith keeps with great care, but that don't always reach everyone who needs them. If that's you, there's more, much more. Because what Saint Teresa of Avila wrote about intercession, about souls, about prayer for the departed, about the saints, and how they act from heaven, can't fit in a single encounter. It's years of writing, of mystical experience, of theology lived from the inside, from a woman who spent decades learning how grace works and who left it all written down so that other people wouldn't have to learn it alone. Those writings are still a source. They still give something to drink to whoever arrives thirsty. And the way Saint Teresa of Avila speaks about the departed, about souls, about what the living can do for those who have already gone, is one of the richest and least known parts of her entire body of work. There are people who hear all of this and feel something beginning to shift inside them, who sense that the name of the departed they've been carrying in silence starts to feel different, that the distance that seemed permanent between them and that loved one has cracks in it, places where something can get through. What they're feeling is real, and there's more of that waiting in the next encounter. What's waiting comes from that same voice, that same source, and it has to do with something many people sense, but few dare to ask out loud, whether the departed hear us, whether they somehow know we remember them, whether the love we still carry for them reaches them in some way, wherever they are. Saint Teresa of Jesus has something to say about that, something concrete, rooted in teaching, lived in her own experience, and it's worth hearing. I'll be waiting for you there. And before you go, I want to say something that comes from inside, and that Saint Teresa of Avila taught me to say without hedging. The person who stays to the end of something like this doesn't stay out of curiosity. She stays because she has someone, because there's a name she's carrying, because the love for that departed person didn't leave with him and doesn't know where to go. And that love, the kind that sometimes doesn't know how to pray but is still burning, is the raw material of everything Martha can carry before Christ. God doesn't need you to arrive with your heart in order or your words just right. Martha didn't have them either when she went running down that road. Staying on your feet when grief is crushing you has a weight that's hard to see from the outside. What Martha did in Bethany, going out on the road with a broken heart and faith still intact, was the act of someone who had run out of options and decided that the last option she had left was Christ. Without declared heroism, without speeches, without ceremony, still wearing her mourning clothes, feet moving on their own because her heart was sending them. That's what people do when they love deeply. When there's nothing left to do, they go to the one who can do something with what's left. And that, however small it feels from the inside, is exactly what Christ recognized in her when he saw her coming down that road. If you're here with the name of your departed in your heart, it's because you've also decided that the last option is the first. That in the middle of everything you cannot do for that soul from earth, there is one thing you can. Seek the one who can carry that name further than your arms can reach. And that decision, that small and enormous decision to seek rather than stay still, is exactly what Christ recognized in Martha when he saw her coming down the road in Bethany. He saw her, he called her by name, and he answered. Saint Teresa of Avila closed many of her letters with a line her recipients saved and repeated, a line that sums up everything she believed about prayer and about the way God responds to those who seek him with love. In her own words, Saint Teresa of Jesus wrote that whoever seeks God with love, God never fails, and that though the answer may be slow in coming, it comes, and it comes better than whoever was asking could have imagined when they first asked. That is what Saint Martha carries before Christ on July 29th with the name of your departed. The certainty that Christ does not fail, that what he promised on that road in Bethany still stands, that he is the resurrection and the life, and that that life reaches the soul you carry in your heart. May Saint Martha intercede for your departed. May Christ hear as he heard Martha on the road. And may the peace that Lazarus found when he stepped out of the tomb reach in some way to where you are today, a place where love and loss live together, waiting for something only God can give. May it be so, and may God keep you.